What is up, guys? This is going to be my first episode in our series called VGC Systems. I'm trying to bring more streamlined education to VGC. This one specifically is on Team Preview. Now, Team Preview is something that strikes very close to my heart because I have spent a lot of effort in trying to make sure my game planning is very good, and I've gotten decent at it. So this is one of the things that I've spent a lot of effort in my 11 years of playing this game. And yeah, hopefully I can just show you guys a few things to what I've learned. But yeah, here is what the roadmap is going to be. First of all, I'm going to help you guys set the goal as to what exactly we are going, or what the goal of mastery, what mastery is defined as in this specific skill tree of Team Preview. Then we're going to go into the system that I used during my Team Preview. I went back and forth with Gemini, like I said, to kind of get out of my brain. I had it ask me some very good questions and to basically try to learn from like my general approach to Team Preview. And then from there, we're going to talk a little bit about actual execution of this. And then I'll give you guys a case study at the very end so you guys can try it out on your own, either in the comments or maybe if you guys are watching this in the lab, then I can review it with you. But let's go ahead and do it. So first things first, the objective of this presentation is I can teach you guys a structure that you guys can mentally understand how to methodically approach Team Preview so that within the actual 90 seconds of Team Preview, you're able to execute this during a real tournament. Like whenever you're under pressure and all the stakes are on the table, that is the end goal of this presentation, is you guys will be able to confidently digest all this information and basically train up your subconscious so you can do all this without even really thinking about it. But before we can subconsciously understand it, I have to consciously program the thought pattern into your guys' head. So that's what this presentation is supposed to do. I teach you the model, and then inevitably you guys will be able to do it within 90 seconds. So let's get into it. So first things first, the 5-second rule. So what this is, whenever you drop something on the floor, you have 5 seconds actually before the bacteria. I'm kidding. That's not the 5-second rule. Okay, what the real 5-second rule is, I'm making sure you guys are paying attention. No, for real though, the actual 5-second rule is whenever you look at a team, you kind of just try to get the understanding of the matchup, try to quickly digest it as fast as you can before actually going into depth and really kind of trying to paint some color into it. So what I mean is you just look at the primary types. So let's just say if they have a Landorus and if I have an Urshifu, the basic rules say that my Urshifu will be able to break the Landorus because from a type perspective, I can hit it with a super effective water type damage. So all that's to say is whenever you are getting into the game, you always want to scan their team preview first, and this will help you kind of look at the value of your pieces to see what your actual win conditions are. So if they have 2 things weak to Urshifu, or maybe 3 things, if they have 3 things weak to a single Pokemon, that Pokemon's almost always going to be brought because at the very worst case, it at least just only covers one of their Pokemon. And in which case you can go 1 for 1 and just trade for that one Pokemon and it got value. As opposed to if they only had 1 thing weak to it, you might not always justify bringing it. But best case, if they have 3 things that are weak to that one Pokemon, they bring all 3 of those, and then you break 3 of their Pokemon through one Pokemon, thus getting a lot of value. But so you basically look at their team and you try to scan and calculate which Pokemon have the most value in any given matchup, just based on the types alone. And so that's going to be the baseline we operate with, right? But so it kind of looks like this, right? So like I said, Urshifu, super effective up against Landorus. Urshifu with Rapid Strikes can hit Landorus for super effective damage because water breaks ground. However, that's not normally how this goes. This one's out of line. I'll go back to that one. So the thing is, if you only focus on the surface value, you're basically going to miss a lot of the picture. So if you only look at how the actual typings go, it's not always how it's actually going to play out. I have a real example in that in a sec here, but the typings only gets you maybe 60, 70% of the way, and the rest you have to actually think about the specific interaction. So there's a few variables, and we'll get into that in a second. But before we go to step 2, to wrap out step 1, you'll know if you did a good job if you can identify your kingpin and their kingpin. Basically, the Pokemon which is able to hit their team for the most damage, and their Pokemon which is able to hit your team for the most damage. That way you can kind of look at the kind of game plan you're operating in. So the example I put here was like, okay, their Fluttermane hits 5 out of 6 on my team for super effective. Hopefully it's not to one type. Hopefully it's both Ghost and Fairy. But in an ideal situation, you don't have 5 Pokemon weak to Fluttermane. But if you do, that's just an example. Hopefully you built a more well-rounded team. But you want to identify what their biggest way of doing damage to you is and what your biggest way of dealing damage to them is. So that's the main takeaway from step 1. After you complete your scan, that's how you know it's finished, whenever you can identify their value and your value. So whenever you do that, step 2 is kind of just adding color to the specific situation. So let's just say that you identified that your Urshifu is good up against 3 of their Pokemon, because maybe they're a ground type, a fire type, and a rock type. 3 Pokemon that are all weak to water. Well, what's their actual counterplay to Surging Strike? So that's where I would pretty much think about either their abilities, maybe their offensive ways to break us. Maybe they don't have a defensive check into our Surging Strikes, but how are they going to offensively break us? Maybe they do have a defensive check. So I'd start looking at that. For example, if they had a Raging Bolt and a Fluttermane, well, that's 2 things that are stopping Urshifu from coming in. If they bring both those, then Urshifu only has a 50-50 matchup. So, which is okay, because we can theoretically use a Pokemon to break both the Fluttermane and Raging Bolt. And as long as we can do that, then Urshifu got enough value out of the board. So that's kind of the main takeaway of this color point, is you kind of want to use what you deduced from the value. And let's just say Urshifu was the primary piece that you want to sweep their team with. And then you want to kind of add a bit more color into it. So stuff I'd look at is like speed tiers. So I'd be like, okay, well, Urshifu kills Fluttermane, except for the fact that Fluttermane's faster than Urshifu. So technically, Fluttermane kills Urshifu before it can attack. So this is like an example of an offensive threat, whereas a defensive one could be one that can maybe switch in, such an Ogerpon. So what we kind of like expect to happen in team preview is we can use our water type to break through their ground type, like their Landorus. But like what really might happen is maybe they have a Pokemon such as Ogerpon with Follow Me and Water Absorb. So therefore they can protect their ground type with the Ogerpon. So you have to like have an eye for those interactions in team preview and kind of just process it. And you're like, okay, so they can use Ogerpon to protect the Landorus. They can use Raging Bolt to protect their Landorus by Thunderclapping me, just as examples. And then you can think of different counterplay options. So like a very simple way to kind of like get around this goal right here would be to just remove Ogerpon and then sweep them with Urshifu. But anyways, though, whenever I'm thinking of color, I'm kind of thinking of the specific interactions of the turn, or of the game. So let's just say if I wanted to go with a Raging Bolt because I identified Raging Bolt was a key piece here. However, they have a Terra Fairy Friddraft, which can theoretically wall me. What I could maybe do is use Dragon Pulse to force their Terra Fairy. So maybe I hit their Roaring Moon, which is a Terra Fairy, for example, not Terra Flying. They're normally Terra Flying, but let's just say it's Terra Fairy Roaring Moon, because they're weak to Dragon Pulse. Well, now that we Dragon Pulse them, forcing their Terra Fairy, we were able to punish them with something in the back, which can now cover for it. So a very common game plan I will go for a lot of times is I will lead with something that can pressure a Terra in some way, shape, or form, and then have something in the back to kind of punish said Terra. So the example here is you pressure them with Dragon Pulse, like a super effective attack up against a Dragon type, maybe a Raging Bolt. You force Terra Fairy, and you punish them with Heavy Slam. Now, Heavy Slam's a bad example because Raging Bolt is usually very bulky / fat, so probably like Iron Head or something like that, or whatever. But the point is, coming up with a game plan to where it's like you can force a Terra, force an action from the opponent, and then you can punish it with a response in the back. That's the main thing. But yeah, that's pretty much like whenever looking at color, those are like the primary things I look for. I look to kind of sandwich them. I look for their checks to my check, and I look at the speed tiers, just how I know how that kind of works. So those are the 3 things I primarily try to paint into perspective. Any abilities as well. I didn't really write that one, but abilities are there. Anyways, though, so step 3, after you've kind of thought about the interactions, thought about how you want to kind of win this game, then I move over to picking a goal. So generally, there's 2 kinds of goals in Pokemon. There's either a setup-based goal or a trade-based goal. So one of them is more focused on offense, and one of them is more focused on defense. So basically, here's how it kind of works. Like the trade game plan is generally remove their stop for your sweeper. Let's just say, because Urshifu is the easiest example. A Scarf Urshifu in-game is just so easy to get into. All you'd have to do is just remove their Ogerpon, make sure everything is in range of Surging Strikes, and then you win the game. It's just an easy win condition. It's very clean. So what that would look like, the prerequisites to that are knowing their team is in range of Surging Strikes and also just getting rid of their Ogerpon. If you can do that, then Urshifu can sweep. And, I'm making it sound easier than it is. This is all just theory. They probably have like certain things such as a Raging Bolt or maybe a Flutter Mane with the booster energy that outspeeds you. And, that kind of switches in game plan to game plan. But generally, the theory stays the same. If you're going with the trade mode, you need to remove their stop for your back to sweep the game. So this is what I identify in team preview, by the way. This is not something I come up with on the fly. I think of this in team preview. Am I going for a trade-based game plan or am I going for a setup game plan? So we talked a little bit about trading, but let's get into setup. So an example of a setup-based game plan is trying to set up a board which is unkillable. It's trying to set up a board which means you are in the perfect position to go through their team, an unstoppable board state. So an example of this would be setting up Calm Minds. An example of this would be setting up Tailwind on the last turn of your Tornadus' life so you get a Tailwind with your Chi-Yu in the back. An example is setting up Trick Room so you can sweep them with your Ursaluna. These are all examples of setup game plans. Now, generally, whenever you are setting up, you are not trying to trade. You are setting up either by dedicating resources to getting up those Calm Minds, to getting up that Bulk Up, to getting up that Sword Stance, or you are dedicating a move to set up a certain position, such as a Tailwinded Urshifu with Furidraft to stop it from getting Thunderclapped. You're setting up situations very proactively to stop the opponent from even getting to play the game. So setup game plans, these primarily work by shutting down their options. And then the trade-based ones are just like sniping stuff and then going for, hey, I will trade you my Chin-Pao in exchange for your Ogerpon Wellspring. And then you can basically have a conversation with the opponent through your gameplay, like, okay, they accept the trade. And then if you have an Urshifu in the back, your trade may have ended up being more valuable and you can sweep with that in the back. But those are the two primary game plans I kind of look for. Now, when do you go with each mode? So the general questions I ask, and it does get a bit more complex in this, but just the simple, top-down view on it is if they're too bulky to trade, then I just go for a setup game plan. Like if they survive my attacks and I cannot Oko them, which if your team is good offensively, this shouldn't really happen very often. If you have a good HO team or a good, bulky offense team, you should be able to trade very effectively. But if their stuff is just too bulky to deal with, just start setting up. Because if they're going for bulk, they probably don't have one of speed or attack because there's a triangle in EVs you can go for. You are either fast, you hit hard, or you're bulky. People can only have 2 out of 3 of those, unless they're a restricted Pokemon. I guess they could have all 3, but generally it's only 2 of those 3. So if they are bulky and they hit hard, that means they're not fast. So therefore, they might have a hard time stopping your setup. If they're fast and they hit hard, then you can trade for them because they're not bulky. They're bulky and fast. Well, I mean, that's what are they doing? They're just kind of sitting there. But if they're usually a fragile team, if they're playing HO and if they can kind of kill through my stuff really quick before I can get set up, I just trade back with them. I'm like, okay, so you are going with a Chin-Pao game plan. I'm going to go with or you're going with a Chi-Yu game plan, Chi-Yu Tornadus. I'm going to go with Chin-Pao because I can Icicle Crash your Tornadus and leave my Urshifu to get a double kill turn 1. And I trade 2 of your Pokemon for 1 of my Pokemon, just as an example. And then I'd have something in the back to clean up after I clear the pathway. But that's exactly how I think whenever I'm in team preview is I try to identify one of these modes, depending on if they have too bulky stuff where I can't kill it, or if they're very frail, in which case I will just go with the hyper offensive kind of game plan. But anyways, after you do all this, so like I said, step 1 is just looking at their Pokemon from typings alone. Step 2 is adding some color, thinking of the abilities, thinking of what they could switch into, just adding a bit more depth into the turn. And step 3 is kind of defining a game plan. Am I going with a setup-based game plan or a trade-based game plan? Then from there, you play it out in your head. So let's just say if I'm going with a trade-based game plan because I'm like, okay, I identified Urshifu's good here. I identified they have an Ogerpon Wellspring. I identified that they have 3 things weak to Urshifu besides the Wellspring. So my game plan is just to trade something for that Ogerpon, and then I will sweep them with Urshifu. You run that in your head. You think about how that would actually interact. So let's just say if I run with my Urshifu, maybe they have a specific cover for it. Maybe they have, like I said, maybe they lead with Wellspring. Well, what's the worst case if we lead with Urshifu? It's that they lead with Wellspring. Okay, so what if we covered for the Wellspring by going with a fake out Pokemon? Then we can fake out turn 1 and ignore the Wellspring and Surging Strikes their ally. Well, what if they have Wellspring in the back? I didn't think about that. Then I'm playing a 50-50. I wonder if there's a better lead here. And you start thinking about that. Like whenever you kind of paint the picture in your head as to how it kind of goes, you have a general game plan, you run a simulation of that in your head. So you just think about, okay, what's the worst case if I lead this? Worst case, they go with this. Are they going to do that? They could. And I don't know if they're going to not do it or if they are going to do it because this is game one. So you think about it for a second and you're like, okay, this is kind of bad. Can I come up with better than this? And sometimes if you cannot, then it's just whatever it is. It's just like, okay, well, we tried, learn, and adapt in game two. But ideally, you come up with some kind of simulation in your head where you're like, okay, I know exactly how this is going to react or how this situation is going to go out. But so there's a few times where if you're really doing this good, if you're simulating these properly, you can force some plays from the opponent. And that's the goal, is to kind of force their hand. So basically, let's just say if you identified Fluttermane is their biggest threat to our team. Rillaboom is a way to one-hit knock out the Fluttermane, except for the fact that they have Incineroar, because Incineroar can intimidate us. So I'd be thinking like, okay, so I want to Woodhammer Fluttermane, because if I go to Fluttermane, I can easily sweep through them with the rest of my team, because that's one of the objectives for Urshifu to sweep, or that's one of the objectives for Raging Bolt to sweep, is by getting rid of this Fluttermane. So therefore, I'm going to lead with Rillaboom to get rid of this Fluttermane. Easy enough, right? You can Woodhammer it, one taps it, GG. This means that their hand is forced. They're forced to switch into Incineroar if they want Fluttermane to survive the Woodhammer. And if they switch into the Incineroar, then I would have a cover lead with that. So, okay, well, if I expect Incineroar to switch in Team Preview, and that's the only way their Fluttermane can survive this Rillaboom Woodhammer, then I would simply cover for that with the Surging Strikes. Very simple, right? Basically, all we want to do is try to lead in a way that forces the opponent's hand and it makes measurable progress towards a specific win condition, if it's a trade-based game plan or if it is a setup-based game plan. And then we cover for the weakness of that lead. So in this example, Rillaboom beats the Fluttermane unless this one condition is met, which is that we're -1. And if we're -1, then we cover for it with Urshifu. Now, whenever you're simulating games, something I always think about is, let's just say you have a lead that is good up against a lot of stuff, unless they lead with one specific combination, in which case you automatically lose the game. I will always try to avoid that unless you absolutely have to. Sometimes you have to, sometimes you actually do, but ideally try to find another solution before just all in on that. Let's just say like your lead breaks almost every lead they have except for one lead. And that one lead, they could lead with it and they auto win up against you. And therefore, it's a 50-50 because they either lead with it and break your current lead, or they don't lead with it and then you win. I would try to avoid that at all costs. I'd try to find one that maybe is a little bit disadvantaged. Maybe you're at 45%, but it's at least playable, because then you can rely on your skill as a player and your ability to position the board to get into a board state to where you're able to successfully recover that 5% loss margin. An example, like I said earlier, was leading with Rillaboom plus Urshifu. And let's just say if they lead with Ogerpon, you can fake out Ogerpon, kill the ally. If they don't lead with Ogerpon, then you at least have a 50-50 turn one to just land an attack. Because if they switch in Ogerpon the right slot, on the Surging Strikes, well, okay, that sucks, but at least they didn't achieve anything on that turn. Now we have to reposition. We're on the defense, but at least we had a chance to land a strike, and we had a chance to kind of get some progress. We may have butchered it, maybe got the 50-50 wrong on the slot they switched in, but now we can reposition, switch out, U-turn, and then get back into a state to where we can confidently click fake out plus U-turn again, as an example. The basic theory here is I would rather opt into a slightly disadvantaged board state than just completely gamble that, oh, well, they could lead this, but I don't think they are. Unless you're in the finals of a regional. Because sometimes, like, the opponent, sometimes, like, if players are really, really good at this game, they will, like, force you to play those 50-50s in Team Preview if they're really, really good, in which case you have to do it. That's unfortunately if their team's constructed in a way where you have to win the lead roulette. But ideally, I would happily take a slightly disadvantaged board state, but at least I can play out of it rather than one, if I win 50% of the time, lose the other 50%. Just try not to lose turn one just off of guessing. But anyways, though, and then the main thing I want you guys to take away from this is you use your opener to set up for a specific in-game. You use your opening to set up for a specific in-game board. An example of an in-game board would be Scarf or Shifu. All you have to do is just chip them into range of Surging Strikes and remove their checks. It's a very simple win condition. A Calm Mind Raging Bolt. Define the number of Calm Minds it takes to win the game. Do they have a way to stop you once you're set up? Do they only have a way to stop you from getting set up in the early game? Or do they have a way to stop you in the mid game after you're set up? Those are the kinds of questions I'd ask. And once again, that's what simulating it kind of comes down to. But there's two basic theories of like what you bring. So you either focus on the in-game first, or you focus on the safety pivot. So basic ideas are, if you're going for a more trade-based game plan, you're trying to clean yourself up for an in-game. If you're going for more of a setup-based game plan, you're trying to force the setup as early as you can, but maybe they have a way to break you. Well, you can have 1 to 2 Pokemon in the back, which can switch into a board state. Let's just say if you led with Rillaboom and Chien-Pao, both those guys are weak to Incineroar at lead. So technically, you're opting into a bad Urshifu or a bad Incineroar matchup because they can intimidate both of you. But if you have an Urshifu in the back, you can safely pivot into it because Incineroar does nothing into Urshifu. So you can maybe switch it in on the fake out, and suddenly you're in check now because you brought the right Pokemon in the back. So there's kind of like two theories to it. I don't think anyone's correct over the other. I think it's just different styles, different, kind of tools to apply in the right moment. It's basically, you either have a set lead that is just so good into them to the point where you can play out of any bad situation, in which case your back should be a safety pivot. Something that in case you get caught down with your pants down, you can pivot out and then just kind of get back into it and then reshift the momentum from game 1 or turn 1 to turn 2. Or you try going for the in game where you just trade in early game and set yourself up for a late game a sweep / setup, just some way to get a late game guaranteed win. Anyways, though, this is kind of the example I explained earlier. There's supposed to be little like graphs that kind of are a little line chart, which kind of shows this. But let's just say with the Rillaboom lead, it forces them to, or with the Rillaboom lead, it forces a OHKO potential on Fluttermane. If they stay in, we get the win because we OHKO their biggest threat, or at least, we should get the win most of the times. If they switch into Incineroar on the ally slot, or if they lead with Incineroar, then we lead with Urshifu, so we can Surging Strikes them, and we just kill the Incin. So that way we at least kill their check for Rillaboom, then we can position out and get back into our Rillaboom, not a -1. Basically, the goal of this style of leading / this theory is to lead with something that applies pressure on turn 1, and then lead with a way to kind of cover your butt in case, in case what is Rillaboom weak to? Rillaboom is weak to Chien-Pao. Rillaboom is weak to Incineroar. Well, Urshifu breaks both of those. Urshifu is weak to Fluttermane. Well, Rillaboom can break that unless we're -1 attack, and that's start thinking about those situations. Point is, just to kind of take this home, you want to think of this in your head before the game even starts. Like, you want to think, okay, if I lead Rilla, then I can trade the Fluttermane. If they don't lead with Fluttermane, then my Urshifu is just unchecked, and then Urshifu can create so much space on the board. But if they do lead with Fluttermane, then at least my Rillaboom can threaten a basic one-hit knockout. If they go with Incineroar, then they're no longer in check. However, I can go for a trade with Urshifu and make sure I get some key damage output. So, this is my team up against James Evans' team. Everyone in this chat should know this. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, maybe you don't know this, but I'm the finalist of a 2024 Regional Championship. That's not my only finalist. I've won a few regionals, but this was my most recent success. Yeah, about a year and a half ago now. But the thing is, this was a pretty balanced matchup. It was a very balanced matchup. There was, I'd say, maybe 50-50 or maybe 55 slightly leaning in James' favor. We kind of talked about it a little bit after. I have tools, he has tools. We can bring technically any of our 6 Pokemon into this matchup. The one which maybe is X'd out is King Gambit. Everything else is definitely going to be brought. But I want you guys to look at this. So if you guys see my team with my Chien-Pao, Incineroar, Urshifu, Landorus, Raging Bolt, Rillaboom, up against James's Landorus, Ogerpon, Fluttermane, Rillaboom, King Gambit, Gouging Fire, I want you guys to try to run this 4-step method. So first, I want you guys to kind of scan, identify what the primary offense is coming from both perspectives, and try to look at this from a neutral perspective. Don't look at it from my perspective. Don't look at it from James' perspective. Try to get it from both sides of the party so you guys can really get an in-depth understanding of the situation. So you first want to scan for their primary offense, locate their primary offense, get the typings down, figure out the interactions. Chien-Pao, super effective into Landorus. Chien-Pao neutral into Ogerpon. Chien-Pao neutral into Fluttermane, even though not based on typing, but just based on damage output. Chien-Pao positive into Rillaboom. Chien-Pao positive into King Gambit, because we can Sacred Sword it. Chien-Pao bad into Gouging Fire, because they can break and swipe us, and they're very bulky. So I'd start with that, and I'd work my way down. And then I try to think of different ways where I could land a strike up against James Evans. Or if you're, looking at it from James Evans' perspective, he'd try to land a strike up against me. And then after that, you want to think of the color of the matchup. Paint the abilities, paint the speed tiers. Fluttermane is faster than my Chien-Pao because I'm adamant he's timid. Landorus is faster than Incineroar, Rillaboom, Raging Bolt. The Ogerpon Wellspring has Water Absorb, so it's immune to the Urshifu, at least Surging Strikes. Fluttermane can technically hit Chien-Pao, it can hit Incineroar, it can hit Urshifu, it can hit Landorus. There's no Fairy Resist in this team, so therefore Fluttermane equal good. Rillaboom is able to hit the Chien-Pao if it's in range of Grassy Glide. Incineroar is a great check into it. It's a good check into Urshifu. Landorus can hit it with a Sludge Bomb. Raging Bolt gets stopped by Rillaboom's taunt, so I can't set up. And then Rillaboom, neutral up against Rillaboom. And then basically you just kind of go down this bit by bit and then try to calculate the expected value as to what you guys feel like the best 4 brings from both people would be. So you start adding some color into it. And then after that, you try to think, should Brady go for more of a trade-based game plan or a setup-based game plan? Do 2 of them work? Are there different kinds of styles you can maybe approach this with? Same thing with James Evans. If he's setting up, what is he setting up with, etc. And then finally, how do you anticipate turn 1 to go? But that's all I got for this lecture. I'll go ahead and put the open team sheets for these 2 teams in the description. If you guys want to comment on how you guys think this will go, how you guys think this matchup will turn out, feel free based on your analysis. I'd love to see that. That's my call to action for you guys to comment that in the description or comment that in the YouTube comments. There is, now the actual gameplay is uploaded on YouTube, so if you want to check that out, I'll probably put that in the YouTube as well. But hopefully you guys learned something from this presentation. Hopefully you guys got some kind of value out of this. And thank you for watching to the very end of the video. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out. Goodbye.